With Labour MP Stella Creasy, who tells me how she was threatened with gang rape at university. Also, NHS waiting lists are at a record high in England and the ambulance service is in crisis. I'll ask a shadow minister what she would do. And MPs are debating boosting power in local communities. We'll speak to the Conservative MP Andrew Lewer. All that to come. First, it's your news.
Thank you, Gloria. Good afternoon. It's coming out to 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Met Police says more than 50 additional fines have been issued over COVID breaches in Downing Street and other government buildings. It now brings the total number to more than 100. Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie were hit with fixed penalty notices last month. It's not yet known who the new fines have been issued to, but it's understood the Prime Minister hasn't received an additional one. The police investigation continues. Finland's leaders say the nation must apply for NATO membership without delay after decades of neutrality. Sweden's also likely to follow suit. It's after the two Nordic countries signed security pacts with the UK, which could see British troops deployed in the event of an attack by Russia. Security experts fear the move could anger Moscow, which sees NATO expansion as a direct threat to its own security. The Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto says membership would strengthen security.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has altered the European and Finnish security environment. However, Finland is not facing an immediate military threat. Should Finland decide to apply, the accession of Finland would strengthen the security and stability of the Baltic Sea region and Northern Europe. Finland is a regional security provider and would further strengthen NATO as a future ally.
To Ukraine, the United Nations Human Rights Chief has said that over 1,000 civilian bodies have been recovered in the Kyiv region alone and that the civilian death toll in Mariupol is in the thousands. That as there's been a massive explosion at the Azovstal steelworks in the besieged port city. Officials say Russia's pressing on with its assault on the plant. It's believed at least 100 civilians and wounded fighters are still sheltering there. The Foreign Secretary is warning that if the EU doesn't show the necessary flexibility over the Northern Ireland Protocol, the UK will have no choice but to act alone. Liz Truss has been holding crunch talks with the European Commission over the post-Brexit agreement. Earlier, the Attorney-General received legal advice that it would be lawful for the UK to override part of the deal. The DUP have said they need the protocol to be changed before they'll rejoin the power-sharing agreement in Stormont. Boris Johnson chairs a cabinet meeting today away from Downing Street. He's expected to urge ministers to bring the benefits of the Queen's speech to life as they meet for an away day in Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. Downing Street say they'll also discuss how the new legislation will boost the economy and level up opportunities across the country. Police in Bristol believe that a missing 15-year-old girl has been abducted. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody is live for us in Southmead in Bristol, close to where Maddie Thomas was last seen. Jeff, what more can you tell us?
Well, Maddie Thomas left home on the 26th of April, saying she was going to the shops and hasn't been seen since. Police have been conducting door-to-door inquiries and also looking at CCTV, but they've been concentrating their search on her social media. Like a lot of teenagers, she has many different accounts, some of them in different names, some of them with different pictures too. And they now believe that she met a man that she met online. She met him in person and hasn't been seen since. And she may well not even be in the Bristol area. Anyone who has seen Maddie or knows where she might be is being urged to call 999.
Jeff, thank you. Jeff Moody there, our South West of England reporter. Sadiq Khan has announced the first London Drugs Commission to consider decriminalising cannabis and other drugs in the UK. As part of the Mayor of London's 4-day tour of the US, he visited a cannabis farm in LA to see what lessons the UK could learn about the challenges of drugs. He praised what he called high standards of legalised cannabis farms in the country. Now, if you live on the Scilly Isles or in the Hebrides, you could soon be receiving your post by drone. The Royal Mail's creating 50 new postal drone routes for deliveries over the next 3 years, replacing land, sea and air services that could be affected by bad weather. The Shetland and Orkney Islands are also among the first routes, which are expected to be faster and more convenient for more remote communities. This is GB News. We'll have more as it happens now, though. It's back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, I have an incredibly moving interview with Labour MP Stella Creasy, who opens up on how she was threatened with gang rape whilst a student at Cambridge University. And with so much power centred in Westminster, should we be giving people in the regions much greater power of their own communities? I'll talk with Conservative MP Andrew Lewer. A record 6.4 million people are on NHS waiting lists in England. I'll discuss the state of our health service with Shadow Minister for Health and Social Care, Ferriol Clark. The right to flexible working didn't make the Queen's speech, and some are worried that workers' rights are getting weaker. Justine Madders, Shadow Minister for Employment Rights and the Labour Market, will join me later. And as both the UK and the EU talk tough over the protocol, our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie talks with DUP leader Geoffrey Donaldson. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Figures out this morning show a record 6.4 million of us on waiting lists for NHS treatment in England alone, with the ambulance service also in crisis. It's a grim picture for a health service just coming out of a pandemic. Joining me now is the Shadow Minister for Health and Social Care, Ferriol Clark. Ferriol, it's your first time on the show. You're very welcome. 1 in 20 people waiting longer than a year for treatment, but the number waiting more than 2 years is trending down. Progress is being made?
Thank you, Gloria. It's great to be on your show. It's the stats out today are totally unacceptable. It's unacceptable for patients to be left waiting so long, whether it's for a GP appointment, whether it's for an operation or for an ambulance. And this is after 12 years of Conservative mismanagement of our NHS. It's left our health service unable to provide the care that patients need or require. And the longer we give this Conservative Party, the longer patients will wait and suffer.
Let's have a look at what an NHS spokesperson has said on the record waiting list. He said it's said partly down to the fact that increasing numbers of people are coming forward following the pandemic, with 1.8 million referred for treatment just in March alone. The argument is that there's pent-up demand because we're just coming out of a pandemic. There's no getting away from fact, the pandemic has had an impact, but let's not forget there is a decade of Conservative underfunding of the NHS, and the NHS went into the pandemic with a record waiting list, with 100,000 staff shortage and 17,000 fewer beds. So it's not that the Conservatives didn't fix the roof when the sun was shining. They dismantled the roof and removed the floorboards. So yes, the impact, there's a COVID impact, but there was a problem before when we went into COVID. You can't say that cash isn't going in. The government is spending $36 billion over the next 3 years on health and social care. That's a lot of money.
The government are raising taxes on working people in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So yeah, patients are paying more to get worse service. So they're paying more and they're waiting longer. So they need to get a grip. There is a real problem with staff shortages, with waiting times, and it's not just as a result of COVID. It's something that it's what the Tories have been doing over the past 12 years. It's the mismanagement of the Tories of our NHS for the past 12 years.
The NHS has a staff shortage, as you point out. It's around 100,000. It is serious, but why would it be any different under Labour?
Gloria, you'll remember under the last Labour government, not just staff, but waiting times. The last Labour government brought down waiting times from 18 months to 18 weeks. And once again, it would fall down to a Labour government to fix the mess that the Conservatives have created. The government should be pulling every lever available to them. And so, for example, why do they insist on the pension scheme that incentivizes doctors to retire early when we urgently need more doctors in our NHS? Like, for example, why are there 600 medical graduates on waiting lists for junior doctor training? We need them now on board straight away. So there's a lot this government can be doing and needs to be doing.
And just finally, on ambulance waiting times, they've soared in some parts of the country, but it is slightly down, the ambulance waiting time on last month by a matter of seconds, but at least the trend is downwards.
It is. I mean, that everyone in the NHS is working incredibly hard to make this work. But they've got a government who is basically forcing them to work with one hand tied behind their back. It's not you can't just inject tons of cash at single point into NHS and try to make it work. It's as I said, it's 12 years of mismanagement of NHS that has made our NHS the way it is at the moment. I'm really pleased that the ambulance waiting times have gone down, and I hope the government will support NHS to actually be able to deal with the backlog, whether it's GPs, whether it's ambulances, or whether it's for appointments in hospitals, as I said.
Labour's Ferriol Clark, thank you for joining us today. Thank you. Now, we've heard a lot about levelling up since Boris Johnson came to power. MPs are debating power in communities in Parliament today and what it means. Joining me now is Andrew Lewer, the Conservative MP for Northampton South and chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Devolution. Good to see you, Andrew. First time on the show. You're very welcome. People think Westminster is too remote from their lives, but they also don't want another layer of politicians. How do you square the circle?
Yeah, that's exactly the right question in terms of the levelling up announcements, and particularly the white paper, which sets out a whole load of missions that it wants to achieve, all ones I think that nearly all politicians and all people indeed would support. But mission 12 in there, and there's a little bit more meat on the bones in the Queen's speech, is about devolution. And that's a particular interest of mine as someone who's been a town, district, county, regional assembly, EU Committee of the Regions, MEP and MP. I've seen the whole span of governance and have been ever more clear in my view that unless there is more power locally and less centralised direction, the laudable objectives in the Levelling Up White Paper will struggle to be achieved. And you're right to pinpoint a concern of a requirement to have an extra layer of governance always, compared to giving power to existing local authorities. So not so much about moving government departments out into different places around the country, useful though that can be, but actually just giving those powers to the local authorities in question, because all the evidence indicates there's a lot more trust for your local area, your local politicians, than there is for Westminster and Whitehall.
Government have announced plans to give residents more power over planning decisions. So, for example, it's mooted that you could have referendums on neighbours, on their house extensions. I just want to put to you a point that the Royal Town Planning Institute have warned. They warn that there might be a risk of abuse. They say we remain wary of tension that street votes like that could cause among communities.
Yes, and it sort of illustrates a tension really between the desire for people who are concerned about their own immediate neighbourhood, sometimes called NIMBYs, but that can be unfair, But the overriding priority, I think, for the country, but also for the Conservative Party particularly, to increase home ownership and also the amount of housing, which includes social housing and housing for homeless and people on other income levels as well. So you have a tension between giving people at a street level sort of decision-making power and the overwhelming need for the shortage of housing that we have in the country. So I think if what the government's announced emerges into consulting with local areas about where the housing goes, what it looks like, and making sure that the infrastructure goes with it, then we'll be getting somewhere. If it's, do you want a load of houses built in the field next to you, then obviously people will say no. And that's a short-term gain, that people are happy that they've still got the field at the back, but it's a long-term loss in that all those younger people who aspire to home ownership and can't get hold of it will always feel aggrieved. And, it's a slightly partisan point. It's a more important point than purely partisan. But, the correlation between home ownership and Conservative voting is something that should concentrate minds within the party and within people who are worried about planning and what they would call overdevelopment.
And you would think it should concentrate minds. The target in your manifesto was to build 300,000 homes a year to address the specific point that you make about young people not being able to get on the housing ladder. It sounds very much like the government is going cool on that manifesto commitment, and devolving more planning powers to local communities is going to make it even tougher to reach that target, isn't it?
It depends whether it's power over specific planning applications on a case-by-case basis, which, inevitably there will be people in any street who don't like the sound of it, or control over a local plan where a local community feels it's got more power over saying, yes, we want those houses down in that area, but we actually want a GP surgery rather than a new school, or vice versa. So at a local plan level, more local power to deliver the houses where people want them to be, and not, I suspect, so much, do you want houses at all, yes or no? Because, you quite rightly identify not only a manifesto commitment, 300,000 houses, but the pressing national need for more housing to happen to reflect the increase in population and the change of the way people live. And so that's really why two of my all-party groups come into confluence here, the one for SME house builders and the one for devolution, which work together with that. And then, of course, the other one that came in with the Queen's speech, which is where you and I have done interviews before, was the very welcome announcement for terminal illness payments, which comes in through my other all-party group for motor neurone disease, and some really welcome news on that as well, which isn't your theme, I know, but it's in the Queen's speech and it's certainly worth mentioning.
Yes, and you did campaign hard on that, so you must be pleased with that. I just want to ask you, while we have you, a question about your colleague, the Conservative MP Lee Anderson. I'm putting the sort of straightest take on this that I can. He said people would struggle less with tight budgets if they learned to cut from scratch. The Justice Minister, Victoria Atkins, said that's not the view of me, herself, or anyone else in government. Whose side are you on?
Well, I mean, you know Lee very well yourself, Gloria. The point that he was making in that speech, because it was quite a lot more to it than that, was that food banks have evolved into places where lots of help for people comes together now. So it's not just about food. I mean, certainly one in Western Fayville in my constituency has community law service support. It has housing assistance. And yes, there are places, and lots of celebrities as well as Conservative MPs have said that nutritious food and learning how to cook helps. I don't think anybody's saying, I'm certainly not, that learning to cook is the solution to the cost of living crisis. I think things like the national insurance increase, the 23% green levies, the 5% VAT, which as a result of Brexit is a Brexit freedom we could make use of, would have even more impact. But I think the suggestion, quite apart from the sort of the heat of the issue, the suggestion that food banks and other community organisations can help people to make more of their budgets and to cook and so on is a valid one. But I understand that any time, particularly any Conservative MP, makes a suggestion like that, they get attacked over not knowing the price of a tin of beans or what have you. Now that, shouldn't trivialise what is a major cost of living crisis at the moment, and particularly in the field of energy bills, where I think the focus needs to be, and the government's focus needs to be in the next weeks and months ahead.
Andrew Lewer, Conservative MP for Northampton South, thank you very much. Thank you. Later on the show, my exclusive Real Me interview with the Labour MP Stella Creasy, who reveals she was threatened with gang rape when she was a student at university. Back in a moment.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Fairness at work is being debated today by MPs. Are workers in this country treated fairly, or do we need to do more? Joining me now to discuss this is the Shadow Minister for Employment Rights, Justin Madders. Justin, good to see you back on the programme. Interesting interview with the leader of the Unite trade union, Sharon Graham, today, saying some Labour MPs appear embarrassed to represent working people and that you need to reconnect with working class voters. Does she have a point?
Well, I'm certainly not embarrassed, and I'm in fact very proud of the excellent set of policies that we've got on improving the lives of people in work, because at the moment we don't have fairness at work, we don't have job security for millions of people, and a fair day's pay for a fair day's work doesn't always happen in far too many instances. So we're trying to get a situation where actually people have that security and stability that they need in the workplace, so that they can actually build a life for themselves and have some hold on their own lives. At the moment, there's far too much exploitation, 0 hours contracts, gig economy jobs. Far too much of that is really leading a race to the bottom, which we are determined to end.
Is the minimum wage too low?
Well, we think obviously there does need to be increases, and that particularly with the cost of living and inflation going up. But obviously, when we get closer to an election, we will set a figure for that. But in terms of some of the people who we're trying to help, it's a question I actually don't know how much money they're going to get each week, because they don't get a set number of hours. If they're on a 0 hours contract, they can literally get a phone call at the drop of a hat and be told that they don't need to come in that day. How can anyone plan their lives? How can anyone build for the future if they're being treated like that? I think it's a disgrace, and it needs to come to an end.
There is some good news today. Food delivery giant Deliveroo has signed a recognition deal with a leading trade union covering the company's 90,000 self-employed riders. So we are seeing progress. It's one of many, actually, that have secured these sort of agreements, Uber being another. So we're seeing progress in terms of workers' rights?
Well, GMB are doing a really good job in respect of getting engagement with some of the gig economy companies, but there are limitations on what they can do in terms of where the law stands. Now, all the people that they will be representing won't be classed as employees. They will be in what I would consider to be bogus self-employment, which means they don't get rights for unfair dismissal, for example, or also have difficulties in terms of holiday pay, in terms of sick pay and so on. So we want to actually see a change in the law so that those people who are in jobs like that, where actually the amount of control and discretion they have is so minimal that they really ought to be classed as employees, are treated the same as everyone else and have the same rights as everyone else.
You're right to point that out. Low-paid self-employed workers and those on 0 hour contracts earn a lot less than people who are employed on a staff contract. So should we ban these things?
Yeah, we would like to see 0 hours contracts outlawed. I think there's an awful lot in there about giving people some respect and security. People don't have an idea from 1 week to the next how much they will be earning. I think it's time that these kind of exploitative practices were brought to an end, and we brought forward policies and an economy that works for everyone.
And on the cost of living, this morning the Prime Minister has been speaking. He said, we will do everything we can to help people through a difficult time. Sounds like help is on the way. And interestingly, the Chancellor this morning said he is pragmatic about introducing a windfall tax on the energy companies. They're coming round to your way of thinking.
Well, I hope they are, but it's taken an awful long time. We've been arguing for a windfall tax since last year. We know that energy prices have really made life very difficult for people, and actually they're only going to get worse. This would, a windfall tax, put £600 back into the pockets of those who need it the most. But at the moment, we've got a government who seem to side with the oil companies who are making obscene profits rather than helping those who need that help at this very difficult time. So I hope that the message is finally getting through to them, because they do need to act, and they do need to act as a matter of urgency.
And finally, news this morning that more than 100 fixed penalty notices have now been issued as part of the Partygate investigation. Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner could be next in line.
Well, they certainly aren't going to get 100 fines if that is what it leads to. I mean, I'm confident that Keir and Angela haven't done anything wrong, but the fact that we have already 100 fines from Downing Street before even half of the events have actually been properly investigated just shows you the industrial scale of wrongdoing that's been happening in Downing Street. It really is now the crime capital of the country, and I think it's about time the Prime Minister took responsibility for his own actions and for everything else that's been happening on his watch.
Justin Madders, Shadow Employment Rights Minister, thanks for joining us today. After the break, I have an astonishing interview with the Labour MP Stella Creasy. She suffered 2 years of sexual harassment while studying at Cambridge University and was threatened with gang rape. That's after the news.
It's 12:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police has issued more than 50 additional fines over COVID breaches in Downing Street and other government buildings. The Prime Minister's spokesman has confirmed it doesn't include Boris Johnson after he and his wife Carrie were hit with fixed penalty notices last month. It brings the total number of fines to more than 100. Boris Johnson chairs a cabinet meeting today away from Downing Street. He's expected to urge ministers to bring the benefits of the Queen's speech to life as they meet for an away day in Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. Downing Street say they will also discuss how the new legislation will boost the economy and level up opportunities across the country. Finland's leaders say the nation must apply for NATO membership without delay after decades of neutrality. Sweden is also likely to follow suit. It's after the two Nordic countries signed security pacts with the UK, which could see British troops deployed in the event of an attack by Russia. Security experts fear this could anger Moscow, which sees NATO expansion as a direct threat to its own security. To Ukraine, the United Nations Human Rights Chief has said over 1,000 civilian bodies have been recovered in the Kyiv region alone and that the civilian death toll in Mariupol is in the thousands. Earlier, there was another large explosion at the Azovstal steelworks in the besieged port city. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defence says Ukraine's maintaining their counterattack to the north of Kharkiv. The UK economy grew by 0.8% between January and March, the slowest pace for a year. The Office for National Statistics says it's down from 1.3% in the previous 3 months. It comes amid fears the cost of living crisis may plunge the UK into recession. And shadow MPs are warning passport office chaos is leaving people waiting on the phone for up to 9 hours. The Home Office faces demands to reveal when the backlog of passport applications will be cleared and to compensate those that have had to wait up to 10 weeks or more for theirs to be sorted. The Home Office Minister has insisted the vast majority of applications are processed well within the time frame. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. The briefing's back in just a moment with an exclusive interview with Labour MP Stella Creasy, who tells Gloria De Piero how she was threatened with gang rape at university. Coming up next.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Remember, get Brexit done. Of course you do. Well, it turns out it still isn't. The UK and EU are locked in a furious row over the status of Northern Ireland, which, since the Brexit Brexit deal Boris Johnson signed with Brussels means that goods heading from Great Britain are subject to custom checks before they enter Northern Ireland. Now the government wants to change that, but Brussels isn't giving ground. Let's speak now to our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, who's at her agricultural fair not far from Belfast. Hi, Doogie.
Good morning, and yeah, I'm at the Balmoral show. A lot of the politicians in Northern Ireland are actually here, pressing the flesh, if you like. This is causing a huge problem in Northern Ireland. It has since the deal, the oven-ready deal was signed. Northern Ireland, as you've said, is held outside the EU or outside the UK markets and must obey EU regulations. Places like this, farming, of course, is one of the biggest ones, and divergence from that is looked at by the European Courts of Justice. So unionists here in Northern Ireland are saying, well, we have no MEPs, so therefore we have no way of standing across our own laws. So therefore, is there any sense in going into government? Sinn Féin, which is the Nationalist Party, along with the SDLP, who do have MEPs in Dublin, are all on for the deal. So this has caused a stalemate in our government here, which is really quite choking the economy here because decisions aren't being made. We have in place what we laughably call a zombie government. We have ministers but no executive, no cabinet, if you like, to take any further decisions. So they can rule over decisions that have already been made in this last executive, but no cabinet. Now, tomorrow a speaker is meant to be elected to the House in Northern Ireland, in the Assembly, and that would mean that our MLAs could at least exist. If Jeffrey Donaldson decides not to join in electing a speaker to the Northern Ireland Assembly, well then effectively there is no Assembly, no MLAs, and even a zombie government legally might have a problem getting things done. Now, the DUP have been promised by the Prime Minister, then by Gove, then by Frost, now by Truss, that this would all be sorted out. So they are now saying we're not going into any government until there is movement first. You jump first, we'll jump later. It is looking all very awkward at this moment in time.
Thanks so much for the update, Doogie. Thank you. Now, a GB News exclusive and the latest in my Real Me series of interviews with members of Parliament. Today it's Labour's Stella Creasy, the MP for Walthamstow. She shocked me with the bombshell revelation that she was threatened with rape at university as part of a campaign of intimidation against her. For many women, it will come as no surprise that she says her complaints weren't taken seriously at the time. This is my Real Me interview with Stella Creasy. Stella Creasy, I have interviewed you before, and I know...
So there's nothing new to say.
No, because of past experiences, when this interview is broadcast, you will get thousands of abusive comments on social media. How do you deal with that?
Well, I have tried to stop my mother using Twitter. No, I joke about it, and actually my mum always says, don't say that, because people really do think it is her. I think what it is particularly at the moment, because I've been talking a lot about maternity and how we make sure that mums have a voice, mother seems to be a really dirty word in British society at the moment. It's almost like women cannot win. Like if you have a baby, you should either disappear or the baby should disappear from public life. And if you want to try and combine the two, and if you want to say, actually, this is really weird, why do we expect motherhood to be about struggle? We don't ask anybody else to struggle in any other part of their lives. We try and help them. It's almost like, you know, you're committing some shocking act. So, yeah, I'm not looking forward to the comments on that. It's fair to say, Gloria.
Are they mainly from men?
No, men and women. Women who I think particularly feel this idea that somehow we shouldn't make a fuss, because we make a fuss, we make ourselves victims. And I think that's completely daft. I want to make things better for every mum, because actually a lot of us talk about how difficult it is when you finally become a mum, and it took me a long time. I had a lot of struggles to have children, but I didn't stop being me. And the idea that somehow women should miss out because they carry children doesn't seem to sit right with me in a world where I want it to be more equal and full of possibility for everyone.
You say motherhood is a dirty word. You're fighting to change that. What is it? What practical changes do you want to happen?
Well, I think we saw it during the pandemic, didn't we, where we spent hours in Parliament debating how much money we were going to spend fixing potholes, and we gave parents a pat on the back for doing all that homeschooling. The evidence tells us in particular it was mums who really missed out during the pandemic, who ended up having to go on furlough or losing their jobs because they couldn't get childcare to look after their children. They couldn't get help to be able to do their jobs at the same time. And that means we miss out on their contribution for the workforce. So I've been working with fantastic organisations like This Mum Votes and Pregnant Then Screwed to try and change that. We also saw during the pandemic, pregnant women were completely abandoned. And I was actually pregnant myself during the pandemic, having debates and discussions with ministers and officials who were telling me that it wasn't an issue, the information that pregnant women were being given. I was given a leaflet telling me that, for example, that I couldn't have the vaccine until I'd finished breastfeeding my child, and then suddenly the information changed. Well, we've now seen a lot of pregnant women ended up in ICU because actually the risk that your child would get COVID and that you would get COVID and the risk of stillbirth, the risk of respiratory problems was much higher. So very often mums are the last people think about and the changes and the challenges that they're facing. And as a consequence, we miss out on the contribution they can make. Other countries have invested in things like childcare because actually it pays for itself. When women can't work and make the choices about how they want to run their families, let alone dads spend time with their kids, everybody misses out, our economy, the families, and our communities. So I don't see this as particularly just about mums, but I see their voices as being missing, and I see it as being a hole that we need to fill in our democracy.
And as a mum MP, you have had your battles over how you are treated in Parliament as a mum, with the Speaker to start with. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a very simple principle for me. When we know that thousands of women still experience maternity discrimination in this country, the place that makes the laws on this should at least act like they matter as well. Otherwise, we're sending a message to employers that it doesn't really matter and there's no consequence. And yet Parliament wouldn't offer me proper maternity cover. So with my first child, I appointed somebody in spite of them. My second child, they saw me coming. They refused to let me do that. So I've had to take my son into all sorts of meetings. I've had to have him with me to make sure that I don't shortchange my constituents. Now, my constituency Walthamstow, call it God's own country. I think it's the best place in the world. They're brilliant people, but they deserve a voice, especially during a pandemic, especially when they're facing all sorts of challenges with the cost of living crisis. But the day that I gave birth, we had meetings with the minister where I was high on morphine because I'd just given birth, but we had people who had family members in Afghanistan, and I couldn't say to them in a life or death situation, I'm really sorry, there's nobody else to cover this role, so there's nobody else to raise your family's concerns. So I took part in those meetings, just hoping that my son would be quiet enough to be able to get a word in edgeways with the ministers. That isn't an acceptable position in the 21st century. The thing that makes me really sad is that the leadership in the Commons has been particularly dismissive of the importance of this, and yet the Good Parliament project shows us we might be getting some women into politics, but on the whole they're older or they're childless. And the reason why they're older is that the barriers that exist to being able to combine being a good parent with being a good MP particularly hit women. So men still go into politics, but women don't. Changing that would help us open a whole new range of brilliantly talented people who the only issue is they've got kids, but who can make a real contribution in our politics. And, you know, let's face it, at the moment, Parliament really does need to change. So I think sending in the mums could be one way of doing it.
The leadership in Parliament, they have not been provided the leadership that you want, that you think could transform it and make.
I think one of the things I found particularly frustrating was that the leadership in Parliament, people like the speakers, went on TV and tried to shame my family for how we were organising ourselves. My partner works incredibly hard, but he can't breastfeed a baby, and that's what I was trying to do at the same time. And obviously your right to breastfeed is a protected thing unless you're a politician. And my challenge with that is I'm not asking for special treatment, but I'm asking for Parliament to set a standard, and as we know, standards in politics right now are a hot topic, for other employers. So when the leader of the House basically dismissed the idea that it was important to make sure that I could do that for my son and that there was proper maternity cover for me, and the parliamentary authorities told me that it was a problem and that I shouldn't have legal representation when I was talking to them about my rights as a mum, well, what message does that send? You know, I spend all my time talking to my constituents saying, you have rights, let me speak up for them, let me help you with them. And if I didn't do it myself, what message does that send? So we really have to change this culture where we first of all try and shame women about how they are mums. And I know there were other mums in Parliament who had different opinions, and that's great. I'm not going to criticise any mum for how she wants to run her life. But we should be making it possible for all mums to be part of our political process and for all mums to be heard in every workplace, because right now that isn't the case. And if maternity discrimination takes place in Parliament, it's not hard to see why it takes place in workplaces across the country.
Where next for you on this?
Oh, bed. Because with 2 children under the age of 3, I have to be honest, sleep is the thing I crave most of all. I have to say I wake up at most days in a slightly panicked fashion about where are they and what are they doing. I think this is really important. We have tried to recognise what we can do next. Change isn't going to come from within Parliament. When you've got people who feel, well, I struggled and I managed, so why shouldn't you? We need people with a different approach. That's why we set up This Mum Votes. This Mum Votes is a cross-party campaign calling all political parties to attention for what they're doing to get mums into politics and make sure that gap is filled. And then with the Labour Party in particular, I've worked with a number of women to set up a project called Mothered to directly fund mums to stand for selection. Because if we're honest, the barriers exist well before you put a foot into Westminster. You know, the cost of standing for selection as a political candidate, and the parties are all doing their selections right now, are really high. It takes a lot of time. If you've got kids that you've got to try and organise childcare for at the same time, that's really prohibitive for people. So we've fundraised to be able to have grants of up to £2,000 to mums who want to stand for selection. And I have to tell you, Gloria, it's blown my mind, the women who've come forward. They are absolutely amazing. And frankly, they're nothing like the current Parliament. 1/3 of them are from black and ethnic minority backgrounds. 20% of them are disabled. 1/3 of them are single parents. And 20% have children with special educational needs. A completely different cohort. Lots of voices who we don't have in our politics right now. I'm fundraising so that I can fund as many of them as possible to stand for selection and make sure that childcare isn't a barrier for them doing that. And hopefully we'll be announcing shortly who those women are.
You said that change will not come from current Parliament. Have you had support from women on your own side of the House, women Labour MPs?
It's been a real mix, and it surprised me who's been supportive and said, actually, yeah, this is something that does need to change. And frankly, those people who haven't been supportive, I've spoken previously, it broke my heart to discover that the Labour Party Women's PLP wrote to the parliamentary authorities specifically to oppose a consultation on maternity cover for MPs, not even what that might be or might look like, and deal with any of the challenges that might come from that. Because I felt actually we were letting down, not me, it's too late for me. I promise you I'm never going to have any other children. I'm too old and it was too stressful the first time and the second time round. But all those women who are looking at Parliament and thinking, well, actually, could I do this and be a good mum? And I think it's entirely right that we ask what we can do to support those. And frankly, for the Labour movement, we should be at the forefront of that argument. After all, we stand for labour rights and employment rights rather than behind it. I was really touched that Theresa May reached out and spoke to the parliamentary authorities and supported the idea of locum MPs. And there have been MPs in different political parties who've come to me, and also younger MPs come to me saying, actually, this is going to affect me. But you know what, Gloria, I'm used to this now. I stick my head above the parapet, people scream and shout at me, and you have to listen, you have to understand if maybe you've got things wrong. But ultimately, if you believe in something, it's really worth the fight. People told me not to campaign on legal loan sharks. They told me not to campaign on abortion rights in Northern Ireland. I'm so pleased that we've made progress on that now. And I hope in 5 years' time, the debate around why it matters to make sure our politics is open to everyone, whether they're mums or not, dads or not, of any age, of any background, is fundamentally changed. Right now, we're at the point where people send a lot of abuse, and I get that. But one of the things that 10 years of being in Parliament has taught me is that things do move eventually.
Parliament's had a terrible time lately. Arguably, it's always been terrible on sexual harassment and misogyny, but now it's coming to light, which arguably is a good thing. At least people call it out and people lose their jobs as a result. Have you ever personally been subject to sexual harassment?
Yes, all my life. Actually, it started when I was at university, and to this day I'm still terrified that I will run into again the group of men who did it, I was at university thank God, Facebook and social media, so they were limited in the tools that they had to do it. But I'll never forget the night that I was in a room with them all and they threatened to gang rape me, let alone the posters that they put up around the college when I had the temerity to stand for a position in the student union, telling people not to vote for me because of who I'd slept with. And that happened at a Cambridge college. I wish I could tell you from the stories that I hear from young women that sexual harassment in our universities isn't an issue anymore. I think it still is. I tell you that because I think that culture isn't unique to Parliament, where there's privilege and entitlement. And frankly, it's always the men that people think is least likely to do it who are involved in it. Because certainly the young men, and they were men at the time, they were late teenagers, have gone on to be doctors and civil servants and high flyers. But I tell you that because I think we need to have an honest conversation about why this isn't changing anytime soon. Many of us started talking about the sexual harassment and misogyny and discrimination that we saw when we first got elected in 2010. Well, it's now 2022, and these stories are achingly familiar. I'm really pleased that we have an independent complaints process in Parliament, but frankly, it isn't moving quick enough. And I know too many cases where women still are too frightened to come forward, people are too frightened to talk about what's going on, and what the outcomes are and what happens in terms of people defending their friends rather than recognising that we have to change that culture worries me, because we only get an opportunity to refresh our Parliament and bring in those new voices every 4 or 5 years. I know we've been having elections more frequently than that, but I think that's going to change now. And, you know, one of the things that really troubles me is that 41% of people in this country just think that democracy doesn't work anymore. When you have that many people who think that, that's when extremes come into politics. That's when people start being able to say, well, we need other ways of running the country. I'm a passionate defender of democracy as I'm a passionate defender of socialism. So I know we have to get our house in order to get our country in order.
Stella, that story of what happened to you at Cambridge made me send shivers down my spine, and not in a good way. Did anything happen?
Oh no, I was held up and I was admonished by the college authorities at the time because they chose to believe the idea that I was probably a wronged woman. And as I say, it took public humiliation and posters and finally other people coming forward and me collating the evidence of all the notes, the spitting in my room, the rubbish that was thrown at me, the sexual abuse and harassment if I tried to walk into the bar that came from this group of young men. I'm in my mid-40s now, and it's the first time I've really felt even willing to talk about it. And I think one of the things about this is that people expect women all the time to be, and someone said to me, oh, well, you're not a wallflower, as if it doesn't happen to women if they're not strong. It was terrifying at the time. As I say, I'm terrified I'll ever run into those young men again. And I say that because several years after I left university, I did exactly that. I walked into a bar and they were all sat there and I collapsed inside and left as soon as I could. So once it's happened to you, it will always shape you. But one of the things I want to say to women who've experienced those things in life and to the women in Parliament now is you will find allies, you will find those of us prepared to stand with you because we know what it's like, we know how hard it is, and we know the impact it can have on you. I want to see real change in our universities in the same way that I want to see real change in our schools, because I think we still have problems with sexual harassment in schools. One of the reasons I stood for Parliament, one of the reasons that I stand now is to be able to change some of those things. And I know you were like that too, Gloria, where you refused to accept that this was just the way of the world. But one of the things I think 12 years into being an MP is that the pace of change is achingly slow. And as much as it's about the changes we want to see, it's how quickly we can get there. I look now at my little daughter who's 2.5 years old. I look at my son who's 8 months old. I want them to inherit a very different world, and I'm determined that we make that happen. So 12 years into being an MP, I share my story about the sexual harassment I've experienced. I look at what's happening in Parliament now, and I say it's about deeds, not words. So whether it is fighting to get more mothers into Parliament, refusing to be told by my colleagues to shut up talking about the challenges that we face, or wanting to work with groups in society like Pregnant and Screwed and empower those women and empower those different voices to come forward, I'm more determined than ever.
Wow. Stella Creasy, thank you, sincerely. Following that interview, we asked Cambridge University for a response. A spokesperson told us that they were extremely sorry to hear of the horrific ordeal Stella Creasy experienced and added, sexual harassment of any sort has absolutely no place at the university. In recent years, the university has taken significant steps in order to provide support for victims of sexual misconduct. You can watch my Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel or catch them on the Real Me podcast. Listen on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Just search for GB News. Your views on the politics of the day. Graham says, as a gay Conservative man, I would like to say after watching the Stella Creasy interview, I fully support her and agree with most aspects of what she says. I would not be prepared to come up against her at an election if I were Boris Johnson. I wish her well and suspect she will be the first Labour female Prime Minister. That is my prediction. Surinder says, the same politicians and media commentators who constantly wanted more lockdowns than the government wanted are now the same people who constantly whine about how the government is not doing enough to mitigate the consequences of those same lockdowns. I think that's in relation to our NHS chat earlier. Richard in Northampton says there is a place for 0 hours contracts for many people. They're not appropriate for those seeking full-time employment, but do suit many people who are happy to work on a part-time and flexible basis. I fear banning such contracts will remove options for the people that they suit. One size doesn't fit all. Thank you for getting in touch. Thank you for watching. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Tom Harwood will be here tomorrow, and join me again at 12 next Monday. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. First, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Dry, bright and a bit breezy sums up the weather for most today. It won't be completely dry. There will be some showers across western Scotland and Northern Ireland caused by this little weather feature which is slowly drifting in. For most places, though, it is going to be a fairly benign kind of weather day. Yes, there's a fair bit of cloud around, but some places seeing some decent spells of sunshine, parts of eastern England in particular, and at times across parts of northern England, some sunshine on the south coast as well. But generally a lot of cloud, but a lot of dry weather for England, Wales and eastern Scotland. But northwest Scotland's staying fairly soggy, and there'll be a few showers drifting into the west of Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. A cooler feel here as well with a brisk breeze. Elsewhere, temperatures around average, high teens, maybe up to 20 in the sunshine across Essex and Kent. As we go through this evening, we'll see a bit more of that showery rain drifting south through southern Scotland into northern England, North Wales, maybe even a shower or two over Lincolnshire and the Midlands for a time. But that all scoots away by dawn, and again, most of us will start Friday dry. Quite a mild night, double digits in many towns and cities. On to Friday, and quite a lot of clouds. Certainly initially, the sunshine fairly hazy over England and Wales, but generally a fine day here. Dry and bright too for Northern Ireland with some sunshine. Again, it'll be northwestern parts of Scotland that see the rain, spreading more widely across the Northern Isles through the day. Quite soggy across the Highlands, but through the Central Belt, southern Scotland, most places dry. Plenty of afternoon sunshine across England and Wales, and a warmer day as well. Temperatures could get up to 23 across the eastern parts of England. There will be a bit more of a breeze blowing during Friday, but still very pleasant conditions through Friday evening. Still a few scattered showers across the northwest, but for most places, high pressure is moving in during Friday, and that will bring most of us a fine day on Saturday as well with some warm sunshine. There is the likelihood, though, of some thunderstorms coming up from the south on Saturday night and Sunday.
Since the first Gulf War, I've covered complex conflicts around the globe. For comprehensive coverage of the ongoing situation in Ukraine, join me, Alastair Stewart, every Saturday and Sunday from noon.
If you are the most authoritarian regime, at some point they will rise up.
Which will become more dangerous.
You cannot occupy a country of that size.
And that means World War III.
That means war. Putin did not expect that.
That's me, Alastair Stewart, from 12, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey.